it's not just about changing the conversation. It's about changing the goal of the conversation. It's not just about trying to be right or trying to prove somebody wrong, but it's about seeking to understand, seeking to learn, and seeking to grow. And when that's the objective of our conversation, that's when everybody starts to win.
If you don't understand, don't misunderstand. And a lot of people, when they don't understand, they already draw their conclusion or make assumptions that their perception of what they understood is the reality. If we're not trying to be right or trying to make somebody else wrong, but we're seeking clarity, that's where the bridge can actually be crossed.
All right, welcome back to another episode of It's Not So Black and White. As of right now, I'm flying solo, but we might strike it lucky and see if one or two co-hosts happen to hop on a little bit after we've kicked off. But it is my pleasure tonight to be chatting with Tim Heale, all the way from the UK. And just for those who are listening live, I believe is it 3:30 in the morning for you, or a little after 3:30?
No, it's about 25 to 2.
25 to 2. Okay. We just had a time change here, and maybe yours hasn't come up yet. So
weekend.
Okay, there you go. So we happen to bridge the gap nicely. So it doesn't feel like it's totally the middle of the night for you. Yeah. So you have quite a storied, background. You've done a lot of things. What I thought a topic would be very interesting to tackle tonight was just this idea of propaganda and PSYOPs, or psychological operations, because in military conflicts, this is a very, I guess, a very important part of it, but it's also probably shrouded in a lot of mystery for many people. When they hear these terms, they probably have some ideas or misconceptions about it, or things have been sensationalized, maybe in the realm of Hollywood or in the movie industry, and it probably looks a lot different than how it's dramatized on the big screen. So I'll let you just introduce yourself and share just a brief bit of your kind of your backstory.
Okay. Well, I like your the title for this, Black and White. It's not just black and white. Black and White is what our association's called. It's called the Black and White Association.
Okay.
For ex-PSYOPers, or UK PSYOPers, to get together occasionally. And funny enough, I've just had an email through from the Royal British Legion asking for who wants to march at the cenotaph this year, and I'm the secretary for the association, so it's down to me to pull the guys together, and we'll go and march on the cenotaph in London on Remembrance Sunday. So, and that's the Black and White Association.
Okay.
Anyway, so my backstory starts a while back. Just a quick potted history. I joined the British Army at the age of 16 in 1974.
So just a couple of years ago.
Just a couple of years back.
Yeah.
And I joined the Royal Anglian Regiment, which is an infantry regiment.
Yeah.
With a long history. We were made up of the 9 county regiments of the east of England. So our first battalion's made up of the Norfolks, Suffolks, and Cams.
Okay.
Our second battalion's made up of the Lincolnshires, Leicestershires, and Northamptonshire. And our third battalion was the Beds, Herts, and Essex.
Okay.
So I should have gone to the third battalion, which were the Pompadours. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, when I came out of training, I was posted to the second battalion, who were in Munster at the time, and they were the poachers.
Poachers?
First battalion, yeah. There's a story behind that as well.
Okay.
Our first battalion were called the Vikings.
Okay.
So for the Norfolk, Suffolks, and Cams. Anyway, the poachers, but the second battalion, it comes from the Lincolnshire poacher.
Okay.
And being a poacher, I thought I'd practice the art.
Okay.
Growing up on a farm as a kid and that, I'm used to sort of doing a bit of the old bunny hunting and whatnot.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought go do a bit of fishing. Unfortunately, these fish weren't mine to take. And I almost got caught by the gamekeeper. But there you go. That's been a poacher. So moving on.
Yeah.
I served with the battalion for quite a few years. And then when I left the battalion, I left the army for the first time and joined our reserves.
Yeah.
And I joined Special Air Service. So I
The
was
SAS.
I did selection with 2-1 Special Air Service Regiment with C Squadron, which were based at Hitchin in Hertfordshire.
So the SAS, if I understand, and there's also an SBS as well in the UK military.
Special Boat Service.
Yeah, and so for those who might be watching from like the US, for example, the SAS would be comparable to what unit in the US military?
Oh, I don't think there is. I think
there's a little dig
the
there.
closest you get is Delta Force or something like that.
Right. I guess then the SBS would be akin to like the Navy SEALs.
Yeah.
And then for us in Canada, GTF2 is kind of like our highest level of special operators. So
yeah. So anyway, I've gone through selection with 2-1 SAS.
Yeah.
I'm on the final exercise of selection. I'm about 19 hours in. I'm lugging around about 60, 65 pound of kit on my back. Pitch black. My foot's gone down a rabbit hole. My foot stays still. My body's gone round it. And I woke up in hospital with a twisted knee.
Okay.
That was the end of my SAS career.
So you had a very relatively short SAS career.
Well, say short, it was about a year.
Okay. Yeah.
For SAS selection for a reserve, it takes about a year, and that involves every other weekend, pretty much for the best part of 6 months. Prior to that starting, I was training, doing a lot of hill work, so going up into the mountains of Wales on a weekend on my own, pounding up and down the Welsh hills, getting to know routes, going up into the Lake District, going up to Peak District, just doing lots of walking at weekends, doing lots of gym work during the week, and then
doing work being running in the sand.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, gym work. So gym, doing a bit of a workout and stuff like that. Just get myself up to proper fitness, ready to start a course. And when I started the course, the selection course for reserves lasts about 6 months.
Okay.
Which is the initial one. So that's the way every other weekend you turn up on a Wednesday evening for the drill night, and then you go away at the end of that 6 months for an intensive week. Just over it's sort of 10 days. It's the 2 weekends and it's the week in between, and you're doing all the hill work. You're doing all the skills that you've learned, and if you get through the end of that, then you get what they call your badged, and then you go on to what they call continuation training.
Okay.
But I didn't quite get to.
You didn't quite get there.
But it took me a few years to get back. I mean, still have dramas with my knees nowadays.
Right. Yeah. So then, was it from there, or where did sort of PSYOPs and or psychological operations sort of come into it? Was that the transition if SAS wasn't going to work for you, or how did you find yourself in that?
So from that, I went on to what they call regular reserve. So which basically entailed turning up once a year to a training depot. You sit down, they show you a video, they check what kit you got, they give you £100, and then send you on your way.
Okay.
Because you've got a reserve commitment. Done that for a couple of years because I'd already used up a couple of years on the SAS as reserve commitment. They sent me a letter saying, would I like to sign on for another 4 years? I thought, turn up once a year, watch a bit of a video, show me kit, get £100. Yeah, it's a no-brainer.
Sure, why not? Yep.
So I signed on for another 4 years of this regular reserve. Bugger sent me a letter back, mobilising me.
Okay, so you think you're signing up for a once a year sort of thing, and turns
Yeah.
out actually we have need of you currently.
Yeah.
And what year was this?
This was way back in 1990. It'd been about 95.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
so
at this point in time,
1995.
you're in your mid 30s. Is that right? Do I have that? Have
Yeah,
I got you?
thereabouts, mid to late 30s, getting on that way.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Still a young chap at that point.
oh yeah, it's just a boy.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll turn up thinking going to have a bit of a jolly at the depot. What they've done is they put us through a proper mobilisation package. They've taken all our civvies off us, give us a new bit of kit, stuck us on the back of the 4-tonner trucks, and then drove us up to a traded area in the middle of nowhere into this battle camp. So we had nist nuts and stuff like that. And we had
Okay.
basically 2 weeks of conversion training onto new weapon systems, new respirators and bits and pieces like that, bring us up to speed.
Yeah.
And then after that, I went home, and then I was working for an agency at the time, and a guy that I was working with on this agency job, he was a staff sergeant in a signals unit. So he said, "Why don't you come along?" They'd made some changes to what age you could join the reserves or the territorial army, and I was able to go and join that. So I joined that. I got the training I got. I was a teleop radio relay operator on Euromux, which is basically with the switch you put a telephone network into the field into a headquarters, and then I was on a
Okay.
relay which links the relays together, so that the relays hook up with 2 switches, one at either end, and then you've got your telephone network. So I did that for
Okay.
a couple of years, and this is how I got into the PSYOPS malarkey. I had my wife used to work for a printer, and occasionally I'd go and help out, and I'd operate a single color Heidelberg press. So I understand the print process and all the rest of it, and I could drive a truck as well. And this new unit that was forming up in 1998 was looking for recruits, and I kind of fitted the bill. They wanted people that were in the media industry, so the print industry, the radio and television industry, and somebody that could drive a truck. And I fitted
Okay.
the bill. So I got recruited onto the 15 UK Psychological Operations Group at the back end of 1998.
Okay. So you're now getting into I guess starting to get trained into psychological operations here, and the British military has a specific unit dedicated to this. And what is kind of their purpose, or because when we think of the military, we often think about the guns and the tanks and the planes and the boats and the ships and boots on the ground and things like that. Is this a relatively small unit of the military, or is it fairly sizable?
At that time I joined the unit, it was just formed up. There was a shadow unit originally down at Ashford in Kent, which was the home of the Intelligence Corps. The Intelligence Corps moved up to Chicksands, which used to be an American Air Force base,
Okay.
and this they established this new unit, which was 15 UK Psychological Operations Group, and it consisted of 8 regulars and 28 reserves, was what they were rostered for. And I was one of the reserves.
Okay.
So I did the initial course, which is the Military Psychological Operations course, and that teaches you the basic rudiments of psychological warfare. So,
In a nutshell, how would we define psychological warfare?
okay, so for the UK at that time, and I believe it's still the same now, it's psychological operations is a campaigns directed at a known target audience to change an attitude and behaviour to meet political and military means or ends. And that's basically it. It's just
okay. Maybe like
behaviour.
you're trying to win hearts and minds here. Okay,
yeah,
so it's because when people hear it, I wonder if they're thinking, like brainwashing and mind control and stuff like that. But I imagine it's a little bit different than this, and you have to have an understanding of psychology and understand how people work and how their brains work. But the goal isn't necessarily some nefarious means, but really almost more like an influence operation. Would that be an accurate term to use?
That's the term they're using nowadays, I believe.
Okay.
We went through a phase where that people got really hung up on the word psychological. So they changed the name of the group to 15 UK Information Support Group.
Okay, give it a more benign title versus,
it didn't last long. We reverted back to psychological operations. And the way that we went about business is that we had an operation that was running already. We had a few guys in Bosnia, and they were running a radio station, Radio Oxygen, they called it. And it was basically just a commercial radio station that was pumping out music and the odd message for the local population. At this time, Kosovo was starting to build and get pretty ugly,
heating up, and yeah.
So I was asked by the CO. He says, when I was recruited onto the group, one of the things he said, would you be prepared to sort of be mobilised and go on an operational tour? Oh, of course I would. Yeah, no problem at all. Thinking, yeah, right. Ain't gonna happen, is it?
Right.
Yeah, so it did.
So there's a little detail there that I want to make sure doesn't get missed. There was a military operation that involved setting up a radio station to broadcast to a local population. So it's almost like a radio station in disguise, or the radio station was the disguise for what was really actually more of an influence operation. Is that correct? Or am I hearing you correctly on that?
Yeah, kind of. It wasn't hidden.
Okay.
Everybody knew that Radio Oxygen was being run by the British military in Banja Luka.
Okay.
And it was set up, and it was everybody knew it was our radio station, and they knew what we were pushing out, and we were basically just pushing out. Most of it was just music, news, and the odd message. Lots of the messages were about mine awareness, some of the problems that were happening in the local area.
Right. So
from that point of view, that's what that radio station was there. That's what they were doing in Bosnia.
So it sounds as though, like in this case, this type of sort of PSYOP is not nearly as clandestine as, again, people might be picturing, or not. This was a fairly open operation here, and obviously mines were a big problem, like especially with like children running and playing fields or something, and getting injured, and so this was really trying to reduce harm.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was pretty much the remit. It was keeping the two sides apart from killing each other. It was putting out all positive messages, and that's the way that we were doing business. That was in Bosnia. So Kosovo was rearing its ugly head, and things weren't going particularly nice down there. So the CO says to me, would I be prepared to mobilise and go to Kosovo? So I said, okay, I'm up for that. So I got mobilised, and then the real hard work started. Because British PSYOPers do business slightly different to our American counterparts.
Yeah,
we have to know how to do it from flash to bang. So I was working on the planning side with the planners to look at the what the commander's message was, what we wanted to achieve. I was working on target audience analysis. So I was looking in depth at the target audiences that we were looking at influencing. I was looking at what sort of products would work on them. So I was doing product development.
So
and
when
then I was doing product, actually putting the product together, and then doing the pre-testing on it, and then doing a post-testing on it, and disseminating it. So the whole gambit. And we were only a small team as well.
Yeah, when you say product, I don't know, because I think language is such an interesting thing. It's how
Yeah.
we attach a sense of meaning to it. You were developing psychological operation products. What are we referring to? Because that's a very sort of benign term. What would be a couple of examples of products that you might be developing?
Okay, for the Kosovo campaign, when we initially got in there, it was putting a message out that for us it was UK forces. We were going to be operating in and around sort of Pristina, going up to Podievo, and operating in that area there around sort of Pristina and Podievo, which was the two big towns that we looked after. We were also had Swedes, Finns, Americans. They were a bit further south. French, and Irish. So we had a bit of a fair old mix in our area.
Right. Yeah.
And the sort of messages that we originally putting out were saying that there are foreign troops coming into your area to provide safety and security for yourselves and for this is ethnic Albanians that lived in Kosovo, Kosovans basically, and the small Serb population that have always lived in Kosovo.
Right. Okay. And so, is this broadcast in the native language of the country or region, or was it broadcast in English, or both?
No, it was mainly in ethnic Serbian basically and Albanian. So we had a radio station that we set up. Can't remember the name of what we called it now. Lost. But we, in conjunction with the radio station, we again pushing out music, news, and good news stories. We had printed products that we were pushing out. So it'd be mind awareness leaflets was one of the big things at that time. It was reporting any sort of behaviours that were deemed as to be sort of terrorism, that sort of thing. So
right.
And then one of the big campaigns that I worked on was called Op Trojan, and in just north or just south of Pristina, there was a town called Gracanica, which was predominantly Serb. So Pristina was predominantly ethnic Albanian, and there was a small Serb population in this town called Gracanica, and there was another town over Kosovo, Polie, where there was another Serb enclave, and we were it was a Swedish battalion that was working down there, providing safe routes for the Serbs to sort of cross over to the Kosovo, Polie, and backwards and forwards, and to be able to come down into Pristina to do the shopping and that sort of thing. And that was part of our remit, and we came up with the idea of putting this newspaper together. We worked with the local priest in Gracanica. Forget his name now.
So you're working with the local population to develop like a print newspaper.
So we printed up this Serb Telegraph, we called it, and we worked with I can't think of his name now, but the main priest down at the monastery in Gracanica, to put this together. They came up with some articles we were putting in there, some of our messages and stuff like that. and they would distribute it for us.
So that, yeah, this points to kind of an interesting premise here. Why I'm digging around a little bit is because psychological operations involving setting up radio stations or setting up print newspapers in local populations, and that would point to the possibility that this sort of thing is still occurring, and not necessarily just occurring in conflict zones or zones that we would describe as war torn, but rather are psychological operations like this deployed during peace times in and among populations as well? And if so, would it probably be kept a little more under wraps, or a little less obvious what was happening here?
Certainly, when I was on 15 UK Psychological Operations Group, we only dealt with a conflict, and I was in. I did 2 tours of Kosovo. I did Macedonia, where we had the Task Force Harvest, which was the collection of weapons off of the National Liberation Army of Albania that were operating in Macedonia at the time. Then I was there when 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
And 5 months later, I found myself in Kabul in Afghanistan. And
Yeah.
then I did another 2 tours of Afghanistan. And prior to those 2 tours, I did a tour of Iraq.
Okay, and so for those who were watching and after the fact, and those who are listening, we have a few photos here, kind of a few slides that Tim's actually put together. We can show and describe some of the things that were actually taking place. And so I believe Spotify does allow for also for video episodes. So if you're watching on one of the other platforms, it doesn't allow, but you're interested, you may want to have a look, hop over to Spotify to have a look at some of this. We're gonna share a bit of this. So and Tim, the slides you've put together here, are they covering more your operations in like Afghanistan and or Iraq, or is there some of the older stuff as well?
Predominantly Afghanistan, and there's a couple in there of Iraq.
Yeah. So let's.
I haven't got much from Kosovo. So this is I'm about sort of 3 or 4 months into my tour, my second tour in Afghanistan. This is down in Helmand province.
Okay.
As you
very
can see,
dry and dusty.
Oh, very dry and dusty, hot and cold, and yeah.
Cold at night, hot in the day.
Yeah, pretty much. I was out on. This was just before we had a contact, actually. So we're out on this little patrol, and we got contacted, and we had a bit of a. It was a shooting war back then. This is around about 2006.
And so for folks that maybe not understand or not familiar with the way that military terminology gets used, contact refers to like an active engagement with opposing forces, oftentimes using deadly force. So firefight, gunfight, to use a more, that sort of thing.
For us, it was coming under effective enemy fire.
Yes. Okay.
So we just stopped at this place here. It's fairly open, and if you can see just over on the right there's a typical type compound.
Yeah.
So where we'd stopped, there was a police checkpoint. This is kind of a bit of a road.
Right. Okay. Yes. So it looks like, did you ever feel like sitting ducks going out on a patrol like this, where you're in like the wide open and you can be seen sort of from miles away? Or does the wide open also mean that there's limited places for the enemy to find cover?
Out in the open, this particular terrain was okay, because we know that their weaponry isn't fantastic. They're not great shots.
Okay. Fair enough.
Our problem comes once we get in amongst the compounds and stuff like that.
Into close range.
There, that it gets a little bit more complicated, because it's then doing a bit of fighting, sort of hands of, or
like very close quarters kind of thing.
Close quarter combat, which is a bit more challenging to control.
Yeah. So is this next shot here we're kind of looking at? It looks like you're fairly close to some sort of structure. And
so this is a place called Nadali. It was fairly prominent. It was a fairly hot spot, and this was a couple of days before I left this tour in 2006. You notice I've taken my beard off. I
Yeah.
didn't want to
Yeah.
go home with a sort of a white face. So,
Fair
I
enough. You
took
wanted to get a bit of a tan under that.
now, now that had a big negative effect, actually, taking my beard off.
uh,
I'd had a lot of respect from the local guys that I was
yeah.
working with, predominantly the interpreters that I work with, respected me because I had a beard on. I was an elder, and when I
Okay.
took the beard off, the attitude to me changed quite a bit.
Right. Okay.
So,
So, yeah, that's very interesting. So, because culturally speaking, growing a beard is a sign of eldership or being a seniority, and maybe the length of your beard indicates even more so. And so, shaving that off kind of potentially damaged relations that you'd spent quite a bit of time building up. Would that be accurate to say?
yeah, fair. That's a fair one.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was 2008. This
Yeah.
shot. Um,
You're up in
this
the mountains here.
Yeah, this is in the north of Helmand. This is up at Kajaki, and
Okay.
there's a dam up there, and that big box there is a rehab. It's a radio in a box. So
Okay.
I've got the antenna cables there. I've got the antenna strapped on the top, and I've got the actual rehab lashed down in, and we've got this big lump of 4x2, and we carried it from the far end of that ridge all the way up to the other end of this ridge to
Yeah.
re-site it because it wasn't working particularly well up there.
So just looking at the photo here, you've got what maybe like an 8 foot or 10 foot 2x4 or something along those lines. Is that literally to sit on your shoulders and carry it between a couple of guys, like an old
Yep.
school Egyptian
Yeah,
chariot or something like that?
just the two of us.
Okay, just
Everything on that ridge had to be carried, and there
oof,
was a
yeah,
safe route along because, and this is re-siting this rehab. So
okay,
that's me putting an antenna up,
yeah,
and the smoke that you can see in the background is the guys that had a contact. They were out on the ground and they had a contact, and that's a 500-pound bomb being dropped on
okay,
the attackers.
yeah. Which again, these are some tricky sort of scenarios here.
Yeah. This picture here is me working on the ISAF news in Kabul in 2002.
That's
This was
International Security Assistance Force, ISAF. Is that right?
That's it. Yep, in a
And
nutshell. And we
so,
came up with this concept of this newspaper,
okay,
and it's going to be a tri-language newspaper in English, Pashto, and Dari.
okay,
Predominant predominant messages in there was it's all going to be good news. It's all going to be stuff that ISAF was doing, all positive messages.
yeah, okay,
Um, and I had, and then I got some new equipment, and this is how I
yeah,
ended up working. But
yeah.
I had fantastic opportunities to go out and interview different people for the paper.
Okay, like members of the local population.
No, but much higher than that. I did
Okay,
Hamid Karzai. I
okay,
did Ashraf Ghani. I did the Minister of Hajj. I did 2 or 3 other ministers, and I did a female that
mm.
I bumped into a few years later in Helmand.
So someone like Hamid Karzai, who was, I guess, the president, was he president? I'm
Yeah,
not sure what,
he
of
was
Afghanistan.
designated president at that time, and we were able to get access to him, and he gave us an interview for the newspaper.
And if I understand, like his governing his government was sort of racked with allegations of corruption. I didn't actually follow the story, so I can't say whether or not any of these things were proven true. But is it a case of, I mean, the country itself is very corrupt, so you have to work with what you've got, or?
Yeah, I mean, all these third world countries are. You give somebody power and they'll abuse it.
Yeah,
And I don't think it does. It matters where you go. That's just the nature of the beast.
right. Fair enough.
So,
And so,
this is up in the Sangin Valley.
yeah. So we're
Previous
looking at,
picture there was of one of the radio stations that we put up.
okay.
and the guy who was there, he was the guy running it. He had an interpreter that did all the broadcasting of it. So he ran him, and I worked with him a few days, showed him how to put a radio program together, how to put the music on, how to and one thing
Yeah.
another.
So so a lot of psychological operations are really things like radio stations, newspapers, and obviously as we move ahead, in terms of time, that they'll have changed a little bit. Which makes me curious, if like say social media apps are being used in this way now, and digital media and so on. But obviously in a locale like this, where maybe technological advancement of the society is not quite as far along as we are here in first world countries, you're using sort of more basic means to reach the population. This looks like just a shot of kind of military encampment.
That's one of the places that I visited. I bounced around for 6 months around Helmand, installing, servicing, training guys up on rehabs, which is a radio in a box.
Yeah, RIAB.
Yeah, radio in a box.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's a 50-watt transmitter with a mixing desk and some media players on it.
And is that to allow people to broadcast? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're like setting up like mobile mini radio stations, and is that accurate? Yeah.
Exactly that.
Okay.
These radio stations, if you get it sighted right, if you get it tuned in correctly, you can push out a good sort of 10, 15 kilometers with it.
Okay, very interesting. So these weren't necessarily national level radio stations in this case. You're just trying to reach a local community, and maybe they've got some radios and they can kind of tune in here. So and a lot of the structures that just look sort of like brick or clay structures or mud.
Yeah, they're just mud, and that's an old compound. But that the vehicle there is what they sent out in 2002 with a load of new equipment for me, and I use that to drive around.
Yeah, it looks kind of like an armored, not quite a cube van, maybe kind of like a cube van, except it's kind of,
there's no armored on it.
None. So you just kind of hope you don't take hit from our.
It's just basically a box body for lugging kit about.
Okay. Yeah.
It's called a pin scour. Great bit of kit, 6x6.
Yeah. Okay. And this is kind of a cool shot, I think, just of the landscape here up on top of the mountain, looking down into a river valley.
No,
is that right?
That's looking down into the Sangin Valley, basically from Kajaki.
Okay.
In the north of Helmand. So that river is Sangin.
Yeah. Oh, and this would be is this a power station? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's the bottom of the Kajaki Dam. And there was a big operation there to put in a new transformer or new to power generator.
And when you go and like work on maybe getting equipment like this installed, is there a risk of like sort of this being pillaged or pilfered or having like equipment taken out? Like, do you have to provide some kind of armed security around it to make sure it's reliable? Or
it was a massive operation to get this generator up to the dam, and we spent several months broadcasting what we were doing, this, that, and the other, and the convoy, because it was such a heavy piece of kit. It was a big operation to get out there. It took a couple of weeks.
So is the goal, the goal of broadcasting, is that to get the local population on your side and maybe dissuade fighters from coming and attacking you while you're trying to do this, because that would then upset the local population and turn them against maybe some of these militant groups? That's
what we were trying to do. And that was big part of that particular campaign, is to inform the locals that this generator that was going up to the dam was going to be able to provide them with stable power.
Yeah,
something they didn't really have. I mean, the power was up and down like a yo-yo.
Yeah. Well, this next shot here looks like some power lines being run over some mountain ridges or something along those lines. Is that right?
Yeah, this is from the dam.
Okay,
and that's taking the power. I think this going that direction there. It was going over to Kandahar.
Right. Yeah.
But they were going to produce power over to Kandahar as well.
Yeah.
And
And so,
this is down the south of our area, Garmasia.
yeah.
And I was down on patrol down there. We were looking at where to site a radio station, and because we needed to put a generator in as well to give it the power to run, there was a big nightmare, because we were going to put in a 1 kilowatt transmitter down there.
Right. Yeah.
We had a 50-watt transmitter down there. There was a really, actually, that's a good story in itself. But
Yeah. Yeah. And this is maybe out on patrol, is it?
This is the one with all the orange one is Baghdad at Camp Victory.
Okay.
And the guy waved his arms madly at us, was shouting us down to get onto the aircraft because we were flying back down to Basra.
Okay.
And we just got on the aircraft. It was taxiing as we jumped on the back.
Okay.
We've been a couple of days in Baghdad for a PSYOPS meeting with the Americans and everything like that.
Yeah.
They closed the airport as soon as our aircraft took off. If we hadn't got on, we'd been stuck there for a fortnight.
Okay.
Can you just go back to the picture? And the picture on the left there is me stood outside a town called Al Kabir.
Okay.
In Iraq, and that building behind was where they killed 6 military police officers.
That's awful.
And that whole town of Al Kabir there was a really nasty underlying feeling. You couldn't put your finger on it, but it was a horrible, horrible place.
You just the energy of the place is just there's something to it, which is quite shocking. And I quite like this slide here. What we're looking at, you titled it, for those who are listening, it's the face of Afghanistan. And we're looking at whether it's women receiving and children receiving military aid, children playing, maybe communicating with tribal elders, if I've got that right, and whatnot. Yeah. So you've spent quite a bit of time in sort of maybe these seemingly hostile locales as a foreign military presence, and trying to win the hearts and minds of the local population here. And how did you find that you were received in these places?
Well, basically, the Afghans, the general population of Afghans are really hospitable people. They're really friendly. And they want a better life for themselves. And because I think they've had such a long time of conflict in the country, I mean, go back to what it was in the 60s under the Shah.
Right.
The Shah was trying to bring the country into the 21st century,
hoping to modernize it in maybe sort of a similar way to
And if you look back at Kabul in that time, it was an up and coming cosmopolitan city.
Yeah.
They were wearing Western clothes. There was lots of growth. There was lots of innovation that the Shah was bringing in, and then unfortunately it all went peat-on when he invited the Russians in to help build some infrastructure and all the rest of it. And then you got the Mujahideen. There was a few incidents that kicked off, and which caused the downfall, the eventual downfall of the Russians having to leave with a tail between their legs because the Mujahideen kicked them out.
Yeah,
and that's when the likes of the Taliban kind of started to infiltrate the country, which was really sad.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this looks like just a place where you would call home.
That's the sort of conditions that I was working in.
Yeah, so you got a rifle. I'd
be put up in all sorts of places. So it's a loaded rifle. My kit's ready to go all the time. that's one of the laptops that we were using. You can see the cable there for the antenna for the rehab. So I was in this place. They put us up. It's just I got put up in all sorts of places.
Yeah, no, this is a picture that I wanted to get to, and for those listening, this is a bit of a curious picture because what we see is it looks like a teddy bear with both ropes tied to both of its arms being sort of held up. Its feet are still touching the ground, but what exactly is taking place in this photo here?
Okay, the story behind this photo is that we were, as a group, we were going on a big NATO exercise in Germany, and on the first day of back in the UK before we left for Germany, one of the officers turned up with this teddy bear.
Okay.
Within half an hour, it had been captured.
Okay.
And this poor bear was held captive for the 2 weeks that we were on this exercise. And
For ransom.
the ransoms kept going up for coffee, tea, whatever we needed to get this teddy bear back. And when we finally got back to the UK, he got the bear back.
So this is a bear being held for ransom. And so it's been interesting kind of exploring we'll come back to that slide there in a sec. It's been kind of interesting just exploring this idea in and around psychological operations, because it's coming across quite differently than maybe I might have anticipated or might have pictured. And obviously, like I said, my perception may have been influenced by what we see in media, whether it's movies or television or sort of things that are dramatized for cinema. It seems like it's a lot more, I guess, practical, and you're producing, in a sense, you're producing messages, and then you're producing media to deliver those messages. Very often, in the case of the time that you were working, it was like, it could be print newspaper, it could be a radio station, and you're connecting with local populations, learning and understanding what's important to them, so you can create messaging that will resonate with them, or that they will appreciate, while trying to win the hearts and minds. And it wasn't necessarily a secretive thing that you were doing. Is that an accurate sort of summarization?
Yeah, pretty much. There were campaigns that we worked on. I mean, this for anybody that's in the security world, or have kittens at this next phrase that I'm going to say. When we were working on a product, it was secret until released.
Okay. Yeah.
So while we were working on it, we didn't want it to get out there, because we were. It was being a project or product that was being developed. So we put on it secret until released.
Right. Okay.
And the int and security boys just couldn't get the head into that concept.
That it was secret only until released, because a lot of the work that, by int you mean intelligence, thinking like the MI6 or CIA or these sorts of foreign operations.
All those would have kittens at that phrase.
Yeah.
But some of the stuff that we did, I mean, it was fairly classified.
Yes. Yeah.
Particularly some of the intelligence that we were using on the target audiences. So we would get information in from all sources.
Yeah.
There's open source information you can get from anywhere and everywhere. Then you got your classified information or intelligence. They take information. Funny thing is, you give them some information, they play with it, and they spit it back out as intelligence.
Okay. How about that? So then, what would be the connection and perhaps the difference between psychological operations and propaganda, if any? And maybe a core or secondary follow-up question to that would be, is propaganda an entirely negative thing?
The difference between psychological operations and propaganda, okay? What we do is psychological operations. What the enemy do is propaganda.
Now, so then, from the perspective of the enemy, would they be would it be reversed, where they feel that like what you're doing is propaganda?
Quite possibly. However, Having said that, propaganda can sometimes be for the good, because if it backfires on those that are pushing the propaganda, it can turn to a positive for us.
Okay, interesting. And vice versa, because it seems like at least the spin that we might get in our media is, in a sense, very rarely does our media necessarily want to condemn what takes place, say, within Western military operations and whatnot. But things are not necessarily always. Maybe I could put it this way. Maybe it's that things are a little more gray. It's not always that we're necessarily the good guys going into these places, and sometimes there's more than meets the eye. It's not to say that that's entirely evil or nefarious either, but maybe a little more subtle and nuanced.
Yeah. I mean, there are basically three types of psychological operations. There's what we do, which is pure white PSYOPs. It's directed at a known target audience from a known source, i.e., us. Then you get the grey PSYOPs, which is directed at a target audience and you're not sure where it's coming from.
Right.
And then you get the real dodgy stuff, which is the black PSYOPs, which is somebody pretending to be somebody totally different to affect change in somebody else's. So the black PSYOPs, the problem that you have with that is if you're caught, if it's found out where it's come from, you've lost all your credibility and you might as well just pack your bags and bugger off because you're playing it.
Right, because it
And
would
that's
seem like there's because it might seem like there's a temptation to engage in something like black PSYOPs because potentially it's more effective. And I don't know that that's necessarily a true statement, but I could understand maybe the appeal of potentially utilizing it because it would seem that very often people would rather consume information that confirms their biases or is more comfortable to hear. And so in the realm of black PSYOPs, that's something that could be done in terms of, to influence people, tell them what they want to hear versus the reality of the situation. And maybe an example of that could be some of what came out of a situation like Iraq in 2003, where not all the information or the intelligence that was presented was entirely accurate or on point.
Can you give us just a 1 minute?
Yeah.
I just need to cut away for a second.
All right. So we're gonna be winding down shortly, but we've got just into some interesting tidbits here, and just talking about the reality of PSYOPs. And I think going into this, I had a different idea of what it really was, and I wouldn't have known that there was categorizations of PSYOPs like white, gray, and black PSYOPs. And so it's interesting to know that our military definitely engages in this kind of behavior and activity, but done with the intention that it would be for the greater good, I suppose. And so, and then propaganda, there's another interesting piece of the puzzle. And it was said that, PSYOPs is what we do, propaganda is what they do. And I think perspective is a really important one here, because perhaps what we see coming from the other side is the inverse of that they feel like they're doing what is good, and we're the ones promulgating or putting forward propaganda. So who's to say? So it's been very interesting to dive into all of this with Tim, and I think we're just getting to some of the juicier tidbits. But looking at the time here, we're gonna wind down this segment here, but we'll just wait for Tim had to step away for a second, which is he's back here. So
back in the room.
Back in the room. So we're just I was just doing a bit of a summarizing about some of the things that we've touched on here.
Yeah.
And so we were just touching on I guess that sometimes by we meaning the public is on the receiving end of potentially psyops from our own intelligence community, and it could be in the realm of like, this is maybe sort of tiptoeing over to the realm of conspiracy, but thinking of agencies like an intelligence agency utilizing a medium or a media such as the movie industry, like Hollywood, for example, to create movies that help to shape hearts and minds. But you think you're getting it from a movie studio, but really ultimately it's coming from an influence operation. Is that something that you see taking place? And if so, are you able to spot this stuff?
Well, I think if let's take the last couple of years. I don't know what the rest of what it's been like in Canada, but certainly here in the UK, we've had a psychological operations campaign directed at the UK population to instill fear into the population about the pandemic that we've been through, and now it's kind of backfired slightly on them because now they're trying to convince people that it's okay, they don't need to wear masks, we've done away with all of that. However, the amount of people that are still walking around with masks on is really funny because they don't trust the government anymore.
So the
And
backfiring in a sense of
one of the other things that they've just done is the Sage, they've just wound it up. They just disbanded it because they spent the last 2 years giving us dodgy information, and
right.
it's all gone P-tongue on them.
So yeah, and this is where things get kind of interesting, looking at current events and looking at the fact that, and again, I feel like we want to tread carefully because we're tiptoeing in and around the area of conspiracy. Although ironically, sometimes it seems as though things that are labeled as conspiracy end up becoming true a couple of years down the road. So I think something that's making headlines at the time of recording is this Hunter Biden laptop story, and I really can't say that I've read any news stories about it, so I don't know a lot, but I've seen it bandied about or headlines about it. And I think the idea is, and so I can't even speak authoritatively on it because I haven't read the news stories. I should have, but just the idea was a couple of years ago when it was coming out, this existed, it was being dismissed and this isn't true and so on and so forth. And then 2 years later, maybe when it's safe to acknowledge, well, actually it turns out this was true and this is real and there are these shady, crooked dealings that are happening, but now it doesn't damage someone's presidential campaign. But what's happening now potentially, or what I'm, because you're talking about like blowback here, and I see this as, well, you're eroding your own credibility by denying the existence of something or trying to discredit it, when in turn the truth emerges a couple of years later, and it's like, well, hang on a sec, why did you lie to us in the beginning? Why didn't you just tell us the truth? So is this what you mean when you're saying that sometimes these operations end up backfiring?
Yeah. So what's gone on in the last couple of years? I mean, where they've instilled fear into populations, now they're trying to tell them that it's okay to get back to normal. Well, people ain't believing them. They're just
right.
They don't believe them. That's why they're still wandering around in fear of their lives.
So then would this be an opportunity then to try and use a bit of reverse psychology and tell people, well, okay, you should still be afraid, and then because they don't trust the government, that they start to act in an opposite fashion?
I don't know on that one. You can try
it. Well, I just wonder if what we've seen is the erosion of trust in public institutions because of the politicization of these institutions. And so what's supposed to be held up as maybe a beacon of objectivity, some things that might have been suspicion are starting to come out as true, that, well, these institutions have in fact, that they're supposed to be objective and unbiased, have in fact been politicized, and that might lead to short-term gains, but in the long term, it really erodes trust in public institutions.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's that's certainly what I've seen. I mean, early on in the pandemic, I was watching the every time they did the briefings at Downing Street, And I mean, the way they were just giving the information, they were bringing up these charts saying this many people have got it and this many people are dying from it. And you're thinking, really? Is that actually happening? Are we seeing that going on? And
Well,
it turns out that they were fudging the figures.
right. I think
Somebody's put in a request for information on how many people have actually died from COVID, and the figures come back actually tied from it, not with it, from it. In the UK or in England, 277 people died from it.
mhm.
All the others have been suspected to die with it. So they died from something else.
Could it be
COVID's been a factor.
right? I was going to say, could it be positive that COVID might have influenced the outcome or hastened the eventual outcome, but was not necessarily the direct cause, or was it simply it was coexisting in a situation? And I think these are questions we have to be careful with, of course, because we are in public platforms, and this pandemic has been a very real thing that we've grappled with, and obviously COVID as a virus and an illness that's affected our population has been a very real thing, but. I think I heard
the average age of people that have died from it has been 82.
Yeah, I can't remember who I heard quoted saying this, but it's we wouldn't want to let a good crisis go to waste, and so I just and I think this is what a lot of people are trying to come to terms with. It's like people don't necessarily want to be labeled conspiracy theorists or science deniers, and maybe these terms get thrown on so much that they've actually lost all meaning or lost all weight behind them. So people are like, well, we don't care because you've thrown this at us so many times. When really what it is we want the truth, and it's so hard. Like, so why is it that in your estimation that it's so like? Why is there a fear from public institutions to just literally tell people the truth and give, why does everything have to have a spin to it? Why might that be the case if you were to speculate then?
It's
a bit of a loaded question, I know.
I think the bottom line of the whole thing has been driven by money.
Isn't everything driven by money at some point in time if you drill down far enough?
Somebody somewhere along the line has made an absolute killing out of this, and they don't want to lose that.
Okay.
And it's us mugs, the taxpayer, that's footing the bill for it.
Right. So,
I mean, you just look at masks.
Yeah.
You take a box of masks. The sort of normal paper ones that everybody's walking around with, and it actually says on the packet, not suitable for airborne viruses.
So is it theater?
Yeah, it's a virtue signal that an airborne virus. Why are you destroying your hands with sanitizer every 5 seconds? I mean, people walking around with, hands that are scraped to their knuckles, and then people did early on in the pandemic. You see people that have been wearing a muzzle for sort of 20 hours a day, and they've got big sort of red marks where
Sure.
And because they hadn't been used to wearing them.
Right.
And now people are trying to get back to normal, and are still scared about going out and taking a mask off.
And so in your estimation, and because of your background sort of in psychological operations, and could we say psychological warfare and propaganda and information warfare and things like that, are you suggesting that while maybe the crisis or the pandemic has been real in one sense, that there's definitely been a capitalization by various, whether it's political entities or corporate entities on top of this, that maybe has exacerbated this crisis for financial gain?
Absolutely.
And so do you feel as though, like, if you're watching the news, or if you're watching even some kind of show or movie or things like that, do you watch with a different perspective because of the work that you've done? And do you find that you can spot, or like you're like, aha, I know what you're doing here?
Yeah, I tend to look at it slightly different to, I suppose, most people. And I think, what's their angle? How are
Hmm.
they? What's their ultimate goal? What are they looking for? Why are they saying that?
Right,
That
right.
doesn't make a lot of sense. And
Okay.
and, and until you work out just a bit, go back a couple of steps, and somebody's making some money out of it.
Right.
And I think that's what's driven an awful what's happened over the last couple of years. That today, or was it yesterday? In the last couple of days, they've now announced that the UK is now, you can put your hand up and go forward for your fourth jab.
Hmm. Now,
Fourth jab.
right. I think, and we want to tread carefully here again, but being that we're on platforms that have a history of when you start broaching these topics of garnering quite strong reactions on either side of the spectrum. And I do try to
Yeah.
remain relatively neutral in this, but I suppose we could argue that if in a span of 2 years you're requiring 4 inoculations, when if you look at any other sort of vaccination that we normally receive, whether it's childhood inoculations or, generally speaking, I don't know if there's any that you get 4 times, other than maybe over the period. Like, I've got an infant son, and he's got sort of routine or regular shots that he gets, and that's, but we could maybe posit that it appears these aren't working the way that they were thought to work, or the effectiveness isn't there. And so what's the end of this road, kind of thing, I think, is maybe what you're hinting at here.
Yeah.
So then, if we were to, if we were
I
to
mean,
just,
it's Big Pharma. They originally said, "Oh, we'll do it at cost."
and they've marked it up 5 times over, so
Yeah.
something that costs, say, $7 or $8 to produce is being sold to the government, being paid for with tax dollars, say at $36 a dose, when it's costing them $6 or $7 a dose to make. So they're making money hand over fist in this. And I think it's behavior like that. So even if you have an effective pharmaceutical product that is beneficial for people to utilize or have access to, it's this sort of behavior that erodes public trust in these institutions, because this is almost like, it's akin to war profiteering, but it's maybe pandemic profiteering, but basically the same,
Absolutely.
a different flavor of the same behavior, if I could put it that way.
Yeah. It's exactly that behaviour,
Right.
and that's what's driving it. I mean, just look who has benefited. Who's producing all of this? The PPE. Who's producing that?
Hmm.
Who's now producing all the vaccines?
Right. So yeah, there's definitely been that.
Who's getting a backhander from it?
Right. So then, to kind of wrap things up, because it's been an interesting discussion, but I do have to keep an eye on the clock, and I'm sure at some point you wouldn't mind getting some sleep, because it's, the middle of the night for you. For people who've been listening and sort of wondering, okay, because there are obviously some pretty crazy conspiracy theories out there. Things like, and I believe conspiracy theories really grab our attention because if they were true, the reality of them is quite stark, startling, and even like horrifying.
Yeah.
And so, and there seems to be this ongoing information battle. That we have the misinformation and disinformation and all of this sort of thing, and people are fighting back and forth, saying we're the arbiters of truth, no, we're the arbiters of truth, and they're trying to screw you over, and no, they're trying to screw you over, or this person's a grifter, and so on. And the average person is listening to this and throwing their hands up and going, I don't even know what is true anymore. And I wonder if even that scenario is somewhat deliberate, because if people are becoming maybe disanchored isn't really a word, but disconnected from, or unable to feel a sense of grounding or anchoring to reality, because on both sides, or all sides of sort of the narrative, you're hearing this sort of fight back and forth, and it becomes, so it's hard to know what's true, because on the one hand, you have things that really grab your attention and create fear in the form of pretty wild conspiracy theories. On the other hand, you have things that are emerging that are turning out to be a little more true than we're comfortable acknowledging, or And I think it's why people head towards comforting lies versus, uncomfortable truths. How does somebody navigate this landscape and maybe not get sucked into it so much? Or is that possible?
Oh, yeah, it's possible. Yeah. There's a very, very simple way of not watching the news. You turn it off. That's the easiest way of dealing with it. If you don't watch it, you're not going to get affected by it.
All right. Looks like my internet dropped off there momentarily.
I carried on.
Okay. So we'll see what gets picked up. But the question being, like, how do we navigate this landscape, and maybe hold on to our sanity in all of this seeming insanity that's around us?
Yeah, right. Okay. The simplest way of sorting this out for the average Joe is don't watch the mainstream media. Then you won't get any of the lies that they're spilling. You're not getting the bias. You're not getting the spin that they're putting on it. So if you don't watch it, you're not going to get affected by it.
Right. And could it be argued? And I think I agree with that. I generally don't read the news on a whole, because I believe that. So because I believe that news is steered by the people who pay the bills. And if you're getting it for free, you're not the one paying bills. Therefore, you're the source of the money.
Pawn.
You're the pawn.
You're the pawn.
Right. But it could be argued that, and it could be argued that, in so-called independent or alternative websites or news sites, I guess they are in a sense, they're funded by viewers or listeners. And so you could say, well, maybe they're more beholden to their viewers and listeners. So that may keep them a little bit closer to the straight and narrow, but there's, it's hard to avoid the temptation of being purveyors of sort of in the competition for clicks and eyeballs and attention. The sensational is what grabs your eyeballs. And I guess I'm of the lean or the slant, or I don't know, whatever terminology you want to use, that the real conspiracies are just in plain sight, but awfully boring.
They do say that good news doesn't sell. It's only bad news that sells.
Yeah.
And
so,
and I don't know why. I mean, I'd much sooner have good news than bad news.
Yeah. So, well, Tim, it's definitely been an interesting conversation, and we got into some juicy stuff right near the end here, which, for those who hung around, that's where the interesting stuff is. But it's been a real pleasure. I appreciate you being willing to stay up late at night to engage in a conversation like this. And thanks for sharing some of your stories, some of your expertise, and really giving people a little bit of insight into what is psychological operations and propaganda.
Purveyor of propaganda, lies, and deception. That's me.
All right. Take care and have a good night, everyone.
We've created a foundation of basing who we are on the response we get from people. People are expressing to somebody else out of the dislike maybe for themselves. When you can respond with compassion, you've learned to develop a certain amount of love and respect and appreciation for yourself.
Compassion allows us to look at these things and to see them as they are, with a desire to understand without the need to judge. And in that space, that's where we create powerful transformational change.